Yes, till here, whatever we people have discussed in this lesson is the event Nelson Mandela. He has highlighted the event of inauguration. It was an inauguration of a newly elected, democratically elected, non-racial government in South Africa. It was an inauguration of the induction of the first Black president of South Africa. He had also included and shared his speech that he gave on that day, where he had addressed not only the Blacks, but all South Africans and all the international guests whom he had expressed his thanks, and he had acknowledged their attendance, he had acknowledged their presence, that they had come to grace his occasion. And in this way, it seems that they also accept South Africa as a democratic republic, right? Then he had also described what activities had happened soon after his address, how he was being greeted by the generals and the commanders of the army, the same people who used to come to arrest him. Now they saluted him and thus promised their loyalty and sincerity, not to Nelson Mandela personally, but to the newly democratically elected government, right? Okay. Now he says that the day was symbolized for me by the playing of our two national anthems and the vision of whites singing Kosi Sikalel Africa and blacks singing the stem, the old anthem of the Republic. Now, this is a very important question here that you may get. The day was symbolized, which day? The day of inauguration, that is 10th May 1994. This was symbolic for Nelson Mandela. Why? Because it was played two national anthems. The day was symbolic because two national anthems were played on that day during the inauguration ceremony. One national anthem was the Whites' national anthem, which highlighted, which expressed the vision, the dreams, the expectations of whites from the government. And the other one was blacks, the old anthem of the Republic, which was the blacks' anthem. Now, the point here is, children, that what is this day symbolic of? This day is symbolic of equality. How equality? That anthems of whites and blacks, both the races, both the communities, they had been played. It means these both anthems, they had been acknowledged. These both anthems had been accepted by all the South Africans, whether they were blacks or they were whites. Since Nelson Mandela was the first black president of South Africa, right? And if the blacks' anthem was played, do you think it would have been a non-racial government? No, it would not have been a non-racial government, because it would have been biased. It would have been based on blacks, ignoring whites. So there would have been no difference between the earlier government and the present government. So Nelson Mandela had given due consideration to the whites also, because whites were also whites are still the part of South Africa. South Africa had become a free republic where the people of all communities, all castes, all religions, they can live provided they are South African citizens. So this is symbolic of an equal treatment to be given to all the citizens of South Africa, despite the difference or the difference of their caste or community or the race or color, etc., etc. So that was the beauty of the day. That's how it was very significant, right? So you can get a question here, right? That how was 10th May symbolic for Nelson Mandela? Number one. Number two, what did it symbolize? You would say it symbolized equality. Then how does it symbolize equality? Then again, you have to elaborate it. Clear? Although that day neither group knew. Although the day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised. He says, though that day neither group, neither the blacks nor the whites, they knew, they were familiar, they remembered, they understood the lyrics, the words of the anthems. The words of the anthem, which they once despised, which they once hated. Once the blacks, they hated the whites' anthem. Whites hated the blacks' anthem. But now what is it? Now they would soon know the words by heart. Now they all would remember. Now they all would learn this anthem by heart. Isn't it? You see that how even a small child of our country knows the national anthem, Jana Gana Mana, everybody knows. Isn't it? However, some people have raised lot many controversies about it. This is not the original national anthem, whatever. But you see that this has been created for a free India, and we all are used to singing and we accept it, right? So we know, we remember it, we learn it by heart. In fact, we are not taught, but when we listen, this is how we have grown up, listening to our national anthem, and today we sing uninterrupted, right? So this is what he said, that this national anthem, these two anthems would be acknowledged and accepted, and these would be learned and sung by all. So this is how the day is historic, that it is symbolic of equality. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. He said on the day of inauguration on 10th May, when this event was happening, where was the event happening? You remember?
Yes, ma'am.
Where?
Ma'am, in amphitheater.
Amphitheater of
Pretoria.
Pretoria, right. So on the day of the inauguration, when this event was happening in the amphitheater of Pretoria, he said, I was overwhelmed. He became sentimental. He became quite emotional with a sense of history. With a sense of history when he recalled the past background of South Africa. When he remembered the historical background of South Africa. That this journey of getting freedom, this fight for freedom had not been started by Nelson Mandela. It was a long journey, and Nelson Mandela had been the part of it. He is the one who carried it forward, and he got the final touches, we can say, or the final shape of the freedom that he gave. Now, how it started? In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War, and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned people of their own land. See how the whites, they had taken supremacy of South Africa. It was the first decades of 20th century. First decades of 20th century, when in 1899, the second Anglo-Boer War started in 1899 and it lasted until 1902. So during that time period, when this Anglo-Boer War, Boers were the South Republicans, and Anglo were the Britishers. The whites, the Britishers. The conflict had emerged between the Britishers and the South Republicans, right? It was the time, that was the first decade of the 20th century. Before my own birth, that was the time when even Nelson Mandela was not born. Nelson Mandela was born in 1918. And this war had happened till 1902, right? So what happened? The white-skinned people of South Africa patched up their differences. The white-skinned people of South Africa, they had made up their relations with the whites, the Britishers. Britishers ruled over South Africa for 300 years. They ruled on us for 200 years, more than 200 years. And they ruled over South Africa for 300 years. But whites of South Africa, those who were not Britishers, they had made up their differences. And they built a system of racial domination. What they did, they had got South Africa free from Britishers, but in South Africa itself, they had created a system that was based on racial discrimination. That was based on racial domination. Now, what was that racial domination? White race dominating over the dark-skinned people, meaning black race of the people. They had created such a political system in South Africa where the whites, they were ruling, and they were ruling over blacks. So the blacks were treated like slaves. Blacks were treated like a secondary class of South Africa. As a result, they were oppressed. They were made to suffer. They were suppressed. They were deprived of their rights and freedoms. And they were made to experience humiliations, and all atrocities were put on them in their own land. Right? The structure they created formed the basis of the harshest, most inhumane societies the world has ever known. This structure they had created, which structure? The form of government, the political system that was based on racial domination. The political system that was based on race, that was meant for whites. And this system turned out to be the harshest, the most humane, the cruelest, the unkindest, the harshest, and the worst in the society, worst in the world, if any society had ever known. If you just go through the history of the world, you will get to know that apartheid had made the blacks suffer the most in South Africa. In America also, as I told you, that the blacks had suffered. But no, blacks had not suffered. Blacks in America, those who were called Negroes, they had also not suffered as much as the blacks in South Africa had suffered. They were oppressed. Now, in the last decade of 20th century, that is in 1994, when a democratically elected government was formed, and my own 8th decade as a man, when Nelson Mandela became the president of South Africa for the first time. He was 76 at that time. So he was right to say that his own 8th decade had started. That system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all people, regardless of the color of their skin. He says that in the first decade of the 20th century, the oppression of the blacks had started. And now in the last decade of the 20th century, what has happened? In the last decade of the 20th century, a system had been brought, a system had been formed, a system had been set up, which has overturned forever, meaning which is completely eliminated, which is completely wiped out, which is completely abolished, ended. That system which was based on racial domination. And that racial system has been substituted, has been replaced by the one that gives recognition to the rights and freedoms to one and all in South Africa. It has been replaced by one which is not based on any race. It has been replaced by one which is completely democratic, where the people of all the colors of their skin, whether they are whites or they are blacks, they all are given equal rights and equal freedom. This is what he announces to the people, those who had gathered there at the amphitheater. I hope it is clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, sorry. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. Now, Nelson Mandela, in the coming passages, is going to familiarize you with the people, those who had contributed to make the day for you, those who had contributed to the setup, to the beginning of this new era of democracy in South Africa. He said the day had come. It was not so easy. Not many sacrifices had happened before South Africa had got democracy, before South Africa had got freedom. How unimaginable sacrifices. Thousands of people of South Africa, thousands of black people of South Africa, they had made sacrifices unimaginable, remarkable, unbelievable. How sacrifices they had made. The people whose suffering and courage can never be counted. These people, they had made sacrifices, they suffered. How they suffered? So many times, not only that they had been tortured and they had been humiliated, they had been imprisoned. They had been put behind the bars for days, for months. They had to starve themselves. They were not fed anything to eat. And when they were put behind the bars, they were given unhygienic conditions, very filthy conditions they were compelled to live in. So this is how they had suffered. And whenever they raised their voice, they were lashed. They were tortured, they were lashed. I think when you hear all this, when you read all this, you will definitely recall how freedom fighters of India had experienced all these. You people must have seen the film, The Legend of Bhagat Singh. Or you watch any such movie, you will get to know that how these revolutionaries, how these freedom fighters, how they had been put behind the bars, how they were lashed by the Britishers. isn't it? So the same experience they had. So he says that the sufferings that they had experienced, and despite all those atrocities, how courageous they had been, how brave they had been, that they suffered all this bravely. It cannot be counted, it cannot be measured. It cannot be measured how much sacrifice they have made. It cannot be measured, it cannot be repaid. It's priceless. The sacrifices that they made, the contribution they made for the freedom, for the democratic setup of South Africa. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. He says, I felt that day, he said, always I feel that I am the sum of all those African patriots. He expresses his gratitude to these African patriots who had sacrificed themselves for bringing democracy in South Africa. Those who had gone before me, those who had passed away, those who are no more there. He thinks that he had got inspiration from there. So he is the sum of all, meaning he had emerged as a leader only because of these patriots. Because they were there, he saw them struggling for equal rights and freedoms for the South Republicans. So he also joined their journey. He took inspiration from them. And it was because of them that he followed their path and he could bring South Africa to democracy and he could help in starting a new era in South Africa. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. That long and noble line ended. What does it mean? That era had ended, the era when these patriots, these great leaders had emerged. But it had resulted, it had led to a new beginning, the beginning of a new era. And who had started this new era? Nelson Mandela had started the new era. Right? Just as, for example, we have not seen Gandhiji, we have not seen Pandit Nehru. There are so many other leaders. We have not seen Lal Bahadur Shastri, we have not seen Patel, we have not seen Lala Lajpat Rai, we have not seen Bhagat Singh. Right? They all had started that freedom struggle. But that freedom struggle, with their end, the freedom struggle did not discontinue. It kept on going on until or unless India got the freedom. And today you see all these people, they have got their place in the golden books of, in the golden words of history. We all recognize, we all acknowledge, we all express our gratitude to them. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. Nelson Mandela is sad that he was not able to express his gratitude to these freedom fighters, to these leaders. He was sad that they had passed away. They had passed away before a democratic government was set up in South Africa. He wished they had been there. Had they been alive, they would have seen the fruit of their sacrifices. They would have seen what their sacrifices had resulted in. What their sacrifices had brought, meaning what their sacrifices had brought to South Africa. That how their sacrifices had brought the rights and freedoms to the people of South Africa. I hope it is clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. He says, however, that policy of apartheid is not there. It is eliminated now. But the wounds inflicted by this policy of apartheid, they are so deep. These wounds that they have given to the people, they are so deep that it would be difficult for the people to forget. See, children, that in 1947, India got freedom, right? It's more than 75 years that we got freedom. Still, today, when we talk to our grandparents, our parents and grandparents, the memories of that partition of India are still afresh in their mind as if it had happened yesterday. It's very difficult to forget. They cannot forget it. And all those stories they had passed on to us. So when we also talk about it, we also feel as if we feel everything is happening like a flashback or like a roll of movie, it is like we can visualize it. This is what is happening. So this is what he says, that the people of South Africa, it is not easy for them to forget how they had recovered, how they had overcome, how they had uplifted themselves from that suffering, that oppression, that slavery, which they had been bearing for so many years. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. He says it will take many years for the people to recover from that wound, to recover from that humiliating and traumatic experience. See, one thing I tell you, it was in 1942, if I'm not wrong. In 1942, you people must have learned in your social studies. In 1942, the beautiful cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were completely destroyed by an atom bomb dropped by America. America just wanted to experiment to see the results of this bomb they had created, and they had destroyed two beautiful cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japanese, they are short, but they are very strong and sturdy. They are very hardworking. They had rebuilt Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which the people say many, many times they are more beautiful, the cities, than they were earlier when they were destroyed. But the people of Japan, people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they still remember. They are still suffering. The wounds of that destruction, they are so deep that the people are still suffering. Do you know that? Still deformed babies are born there. It had affected the health of the people. Right? So it is very difficult to overcome these injuries, to overcome such a humiliating past if you had. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced Oliver Tambo's, the Walter Sisselus, etc., will read. Now you see that this is what Nelson Mandela talked about, the effects of apartheid, that how deep wounds it had left on the people of South Africa. But at the same time, there is a ray of hope also. He talks in a positive way also. He is very optimistic. He says decades of oppression and brutality. No doubt it had left deep mark on the people, but there had been another unintended, unplanned effect also. Another impact also. What was that impact? Very positive impact. What? That South Africa had got the great personalities, the great leaders like Oliver Tambo's, the Walter Sisselus, the Chief Luthilis, Yusuf Dadus, Bram Fishers, Robert Subakwas, of their time, men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity. These very people who were epitome of, who were symbol of courage, wisdom, and generosity. That their like may never be known again, that these kind of people can never be born again in South Africa. They are all the black leaders. They are those who had fought against the policy of apartheid. They are all those people who had helped South Africa get a democratic process of government so that the people of South Africa could breathe in democratic air. I hope it is clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Perhaps it requires such depths of operation to create such heights of character. Now, this is very important line. Try to understand. The writer says after his experience, he says, perhaps it is important for one to experience the depth of oppression. Until or unless you suffer humiliation, separations, slavery, you cannot emerge as a great character. Why? Because unless you experience harshness, unless you experience cruelty, unless you experience slavery or atrocities, you will not fight against it. You will not express your ability. You will not channelize your energy to fight against the challenges of life. And when you are able to fight these challenges, when you are able to overcome these challenges by fighting with full spirit, with full courage and bravery, then you are definitely called a leader. Isn't it? Had there been no racial discrimination, why do you think these leaders would have to fight against whites? No, they would not fight. But they themselves had suffered. So that's how they had a strong urge to fight against it, to eliminate this. You see that those young revolutionaries of India, Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, Rajguru, they were all young lads. And they had suffered, they had seen the people suffering at the hands of Britishers. That's why they turned rebellious and they were ready to sacrifice themselves. Because they thought if with their sacrifice, they can move the Britishers, they can move them out of India and get their country freedom, then they would not compromise at all and they would be ready to sacrifice, and they did. I hope you understand this.
Yes, ma'am.
When you get such a question, just as for example, this statement is given. So in such an answer, what you have to do? First, you will explain the statement, right? And secondly, you have to give an example. Give the examples from the real life. That always fetches you extra marks. Do remember. Is that clear? Just as for example, now I'm telling you about Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, etc. It is not given in the lesson, right? but they also made the same sacrifices that their leaders had made. So when you give such an example, then the examiner knows that you understand the meaning, you understand what is being talked about here. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil. But I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. Again, this statement is very, very important. He said, like, South Africa is rich. Yes, this is what you people must have studied in social studies also. South Africa is very rich in minerals. They produce minerals. They produce gems, precious stones, right? But he says that the country's richness is not measured with the minerals or the gems that it produces. Country's richness is measured with its people. The great asset of a country is the people of that country. If the people are healthy, if the people of that country, the citizens of a country, they are healthy, they are fine, they have a true character, they have a moral character, then that country would always rise. That country would always progress. Is that clear? When he says its greatest wealth is its people, the people need to be, if you have a healthy population in your country, healthy people in your country. Healthy does not mean fit and fine only. Healthy means right-spirited people, honest, hardworking, sincere, patriotic. If we have such race of people, that country would always progress, that country would always rise. So he says that he does not measure the richness of his country with the natural resources that it has, but he measures it with the people of this country, that they should be the purest diamonds. They should be truer than the purest diamonds. So those purest diamonds would be the people, not the diamond stone. I hope it is clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Any doubt anywhere?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay, so I stop here, right? Because I have another class. So rest we shall continue tomorrow, right?